It's that time of the day. The GB News Tavern is open. It's Talking Pints, and I'm joined by Polly Toynbee. Polly, welcome to the programme. Now, I've done a bit of time in politics and a bit of time in journalism. And quite often, you know, I've been quite angry over the years with the press pack. Questions they've asked, things they've written. And I've often said, hey, it's all right for you lot. You can stand at the back of the room and chuck beer bottles. You've never actually had a go. But you did have a go. And, you know, for those that have forgotten it or weren't around at the time, you know, the Limehouse Declaration, the SDP, the 83 general election, you were fully signed up for this, weren't you?
A lot of people have forgotten. It's long ago. It's a footnote in history. I'm afraid it didn't get very far. At the time, that really looked like a moment when the SDP might break the mould, as you've often talked about.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you had Thatcher at the bottom of a depression in 81. Unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, through the roof. Huge cuts, incredibly unpopular. She was the most unpopular Prime Minister there'd ever been at that point in 1981 when the SDP was formed. On the other hand, you had Michael Foot, who was out of NATO, out of Europe. You would have liked that aspect of him, nationalising everything, who was also unelectable. And so it seemed like the moment for a decent social democratic party. I believe the country is essentially social democratic.
And it was led by some big figures. It was led by some big figures, wasn't it?
I mean, at one point, it hit over 50% in the polls when Shirley Williams won her by-election. It did fantastically well. But then, you know, the Falklands War happened, Thatcher's popularity rose enormously. But mostly, as you know very well, it was the electoral system that broke us.
You stood.
I stood for Lewisham East,
yep.
And it's very hard work. I mean, even when you don't win, let alone if you become an MP, nurturing a constituency for several years before a run-up to election, you have to get to know every street, every business, every school. It's really, really hard work, let alone those politicians who are actually, you know, running the country at Westminster and then looking after a constituency as well. And I think you're right, people do underestimate it. I think being a journalist is a cushy life. I think it's a doddle compared with being a politician.
I'm pleased you said that.
Now, you know, I think a lot of politicians are wrong uns and bad uns, but mostly probably not. Mostly I think they're in it because they believe in something and something that they think they can make the world better. And I remind myself, and I remind other journalists too, that we sit there in our crow's nest, you know, shooting down politicians as they come and go. We stay there I've been there a hell of a long time. They come and go. We stay there forever, pontificating about them. And a measure of humility from time to time is necessary. You know, we need good people to go into politics. Democracy depends on it. And we should be careful not to allow too much cynicism. Frankly, at the moment, given the appalling things that have happened in the last few years, it's quite difficult to keep one's belief in politics going because we've had such appalling governance.
Is the system part of that? You know, I mean, you said the SDP were a footnote in history, but it's very interesting. If you actually look at the number of votes, you know, the popular vote that the SDP got compared to the Labour Party, they really weren't very far behind.
Oh, we were less than 2% behind.
Yeah.
And if we had overtaken them, even though the system would have given us very little seats, because it's such an unjust system without proportional representation, that would have psychologically changed the whole game. But we didn't quite reach there for the reason that people understand the voting system and they know that in the end, you have to hold your nose and vote against the party you hate most.
Yeah.
And so when
I get it.
Thatcher and Foot, they were more frightened of one or the other than they were for us, and I think we would have won. We would have won under any proportional system.
I think a lot of voting actually is who we think the least worst is, and that's where we finished up. But in a way, you did win because you got Tony Blair.
Well, we have long arguments about this, whether there are people in Labour who didn't leave, people who nearly left, like Dennis Healey, a number of people who were on the brink of joining the SDP, and at the last moment they said, we've looked across Europe and we've seen what happens when the left splits, it's always a disaster, who say, oh, well, you know, we allowed Thatcher to win for longer because we'd helped split the left. There were others who said, no, it was a hugely influential on Labour. it got Kinnock in there, and Kinnock, who himself changed radically while he was leader and pulled the party back
I think it
to
did.
sense.
I think it did.
And whether that was us or whether it would have happened anyway, I don't know. I like to think that we contributed, but it's one of those what-ifs in history.
And the electoral system, you're still a PR fan?
Passionately, and I was about it quite often. Member of the Electoral Reform Society, Make Votes Matter. I belong to all of these things. It's very, very difficult fight because people regard it as rather abstract. But I think now we have so much tactical voting, people have twigged. They understand how the system is stacked against.
The opinion polls are shifting. They really are. So, Polly, you had a go. You were part of it, and that's important. Journalism. You've been writing opinion columns for a very, very long time. You've never been particularly scared of giving your opinion about the royal family or nuclear disarmament or Brexit or whatever it may be. And you and I probably disagree on quite a lot, but that's fine. In a civilised society, we should be allowed to do that. But tell me this. With the advent of the internet, Twitter, Facebook, all these different things, how influential are newspapers? How influential are newspaper columnists these days compared to when you started?
Well, I think surprisingly, in the beginning we thought, right, we've had it. You know, newspapers will be gone in a couple of years. Everything will be news sites. News sites on the web will take over. What's been extraordinary is the extent to which the brands of newspapers are still incredibly powerful. I mean, The Guardian is far more powerful than it used to be. We were, you know, a small dead trees newspaper, and now we are across the globe. We're probably the second most influential liberal news source that people around the world turn to. In America, Australia, where we have big offices in both. It's been phenomenal.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I see this in America particularly, that English titles online do incredibly well. Somehow, whatever our own criticisms of Fleet Street as we used to know it, somehow this industry is respected around the world, isn't it?
Well, some more than others. I'm not sure that the Sun is all that respected, or even the Daily Mail. I'm afraid.
No. Well, it
depends who you meet. I mean, if you want to go and meet Trumpists, you'll find them loving that.
Mail
but if
in
you
America,
go and meet,
the Mail in America's huge. Absolutely huge.
Well, it's huge amongst the sort of Trump-type faction, that's true.
Well,
amongst the more extreme Republicans.
No. This is where it all goes wrong. You say extreme. Actually, about 43% of the country think he's a hero. You can't write them all off as being extremist. I mean, that's a little bit like saying after the referendum that, you know, Brexiteers are all terrible knuckle-draggers. They're not, are they?
I think it's different. Brexit was about one issue. I think the people who followed Trump, I really think that's deeply alarming. I think, you know, a thoroughly dangerous and dishonest, disreputable man. That's a different thing. I mean, Brexit, I think, you know, people were promised by people like you 350 million a week for the NHS.
They've got far more than that.
Where is that?
They've got far more than that.
Nonsense.
Oh, absolutely, far more than that. I mean, NHS spending has increased way more than that.
But NHS spending is still overall far less proportionately than it's been, and that's why the NHS is on its knees. It's had 13 years of stripped down funding.
12% of our GDP is now going into the NHS.
Yes, indeed, but it's not as much as France and Germany spend.
No, more now, actually.
No, it's not.
No, I'm not going to argue that with you because they're fine points. I want to, you know, put about talking points as it's bigger picture stuff. So the titles still matter. People read this stuff online. They don't buy many copies of the news of the hard newspaper. But then again, when you look at the newspaper, I mean, it's actually, you know, here's the Guardian. Today's, you know, I mean, you know, we're paying nearly £3 for a newspaper. I mean, it's quite a lot of money, isn't
well,
it, really?
It's not, you know, people who really want it will pay for it, and it's never going to be a mass circulation in the way that it used to be. But some people still really want the nice feel of a newspaper. But essentially, the business is now online for all newspapers, and the competition is online.
You do this job, you write your columns, you say what you think, you earn money from doing it. Is it a job or a passion?
both. I'm jolly lucky. It's not very often that people have jobs that are passions. It's a wonderful job, but no, I feel a passionate love for The Guardian, its ethos, its world, its history, and I feel a sense of belonging there and identity. And what's great is when you go out and you talk to people, you know, talks, literary festivals and things, I write books, people assemble who are Guardian readers, and they say, we're the only Guardian readers in the village.
It's quite a rarefied social group, isn't it?
It's not very rarefied.
It's very middle class and very upper middle class, isn't
well,
it?
I think if I were about to win the election in a rather spectacular way.
Well, actually...
And you are going to be the minority, and we are going to be the majority.
Well, actually, the truth is the next election is going to be fought between two forms of social democracy. I mean, they're not much different.
Hardly.
Well,
you can
there's one issue.
Call...
We know what we disagree on, but I don't dislike you, and I don't believe you dislike me. And we can have a civil debate about things. But there's one issue that fascinates me. And you are one of the patrons of Right to Die. And it's one of the issues, you know, I was almost 21 years an MEP. I get emails and letters about Right to Die. And I could never make my mind up because I saw what was happening in the Netherlands. I've seen what's happened in Canada. I worry that whilst, of course, we'd like a civilised end for people having a dreadful last few weeks or months, that it's so open to abuse. But you're firmly of this view, yeah?
I'm firmly of this view. I mean... Every piece of legislation has possible downsides, possible slippery slopes. But, you know, the latest reports show that 17 people a day are dying for several months in absolute agony, which can't, with even the best palliative care, can't cure. And I watched my mother die of cancer. She had wonderful care. No complaint about it at all, but, you know, morphine doesn't work for everybody. And it is agony and terrible. Also, awful things happen. I mean, you know, cancers burst out of people's abdomen and they stink and their families can hardly come close to them and they cry out to die. And the families, you know, the doctors can't, particularly since Harold Shipman, they used to perhaps be able to give them a bit more,
that's right.
No longer. Now, that is real torment and horror. Now, it is possible that even if you have a judge and two doctors and somebody in, you know, in sound mind saying they want to die and explaining why, that once in a while, there might be some mistake. But that's nothing like what goes on now. Right. And when you talk to nurses who deal with the dying, you know, what they witness every day, there's an awful lot of, you know, obituary notices that say died peacefully in their sleep, and you go, I wonder.
Polly, you believe that with great passion. I'm worried that it could be abused. For me, the jury is still out, but you are a campaigning journalist, and I thank you for coming on Talking Pints. Thank you.
Thank you.